Welcome to the Rocks and Oceans podcast, where you'll learn all about living in healthy masculine and feminine balance. We're your hosts, Jamel Harris and Alex Golden, and we made all the relationship mistakes before, so you don't have to.
Fun, connection, abundance, and a whole lot of sexy time will become your daily reality when you choose to step into an aligned way of knowing yourself. No worries if you feel salty and cynical from heartbreak. That's often the most powerful starting point for transformation. Welcome, and we're about to have a whole lot of fun together.
Well, welcome to the show.
Hello, we're gonna intro jam. What's up, baby? How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're gonna talk a little bit about trauma today, though.
Yes, we are. Good old trauma, the good old T word. And so before we get into it, guys, I wanted to get the definition of what trauma actually is. And I chose the American Psychological Association today. And the American Psychological Association says trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, crime, natural disaster, physical or emotional abuse, neglect, experiencing or witnessing violence, death of a loved one, war, and more. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches and nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives. And so we wanted to come on today and talk about trauma because trauma is one of the things that affects relationships, but we don't really realize it because it's hidden, right? And so trauma can show up in a lot of different ways. Some of us may have had financial trauma. Some of us may have had physical trauma, like maybe, you were abused when you were a kid. Maybe you were sexually abused as a kid. There's just a lot of different traumas out there. Like it mentioned, natural disasters, maybe a part of Hurricane Katrina or something like that, or just some type of traumatic event. But the thing is, we don't realize that we take those events into us in our relationships. And so you want to add to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of times those formal definitions historically, and especially just like medically wise, and when it comes to mental health, the definitions have always made it sound like the way people talk about it now is big T trauma, like something that you can point to. But what's cool about how the definition has evolved, even classically like that, what you just read, is that now in the listing of things, it involves things like neglect, right? So there's big categories of neglect, your parents leaving or giving you up, or one of your parents disappearing all of a sudden and with no backstory and things like that. All of that, people tend to go, well, I don't have that big T trauma, so like I must be fine. I don't have trauma impacting me. But the whole thing is that we're trying to understand small, repetitive, traumatic events like being criticized for a lot of things when we're growing up, or constantly being compared to somebody, or not being listened to, or just repetitive small behaviors where you're cast out, or any discomfort that is involved with psychological suffering, that actually leads to the exact same brain state. So all of those symptoms, all of that stuff, we realized in doing like the functional MRIs of the brain and things like that with complex trauma, and medically it was found that it's no different. So that's where, even if you're like, well, I had a pretty normal childhood, right? But you were bullied every single day in school over and over and over and over again, then that counts as well. So in some ways, rather than making a distinction between who's traumatized and who's not, I, especially in whether I'm in medicine or in my business, I'm always thinking everybody has some sort of trauma. It's hard to go through childhood without experiencing some of that. So it's not a question of if we have traumas, but like what they are and how they impact us. So in some ways, it sort of helps to even the playing field. You don't have to figure out it, like if there's something that happened. You just assume the things that have happened to me impact me.
Mm-hmm.
And anything negative counts as even small t trauma that then impacts my relationships. So that normalizes it, because a lot of people feel really nervous. So they're like, what if I just don't remember something horrible that happened to me? That's why my brain functions like this. And it's like, well, maybe nothing like that happened, and that's okay. But you're saying your brain functions like that, and so your brain functions like that. There's nothing else to sort of judge on. So that's one. Two is the fact that we have to understand how brains learn. Like, how do we get programmed with stuff, right? So just excuse my MD nerdiness for just a second, but I'm going to make it really simple. Essentially, babies don't learn through words, right? You don't learn words first. You have experiences that you see something, you taste something, you touch something, you smell something. It's that kind of sense-based information.
Yeah, and isn't it true that babies only have two different things, like the fear of loud noises and falling?
Fear of falling, yeah. Abandonment. I think it's abandonment and the fear of falling. Is what. But the loud noises, it's in there. I just don't remember when.
I don't know.
I don't. Yeah, I'm not a pediatrician. Uh, yeah. So essentially we learn through the cues. So really the programming, the actual neural nets that we have created in our brain from those experiences start out with just the sensations. I'm hungry, my belly's rumbling, I get fed, I'm happier. I'm cold, I get picked up and snuggled, I feel better. Only later do we learn words then that label it as hunger, and you get food as the resolution. I'm cold and I get snuggled, that's love, right? So the problem with that is that whatever you call love is only your version of what you have ever seen. So in my first marriage, I very much recognized the love from my ex-husband as I recognized it from my parents.
Right.
And in some ways, my mom and my ex-husband are very similar in personality. And so it really goes to show, and I mean, how many people have we come across that are like, I married my mom, I married my dad, I married my grandpa, like we know that stuff plays out. So the reality is that that's essentially what you define by love, what you define as husband, what you define as wife. And so until some of those neural nets are looked at, and that's why people say do the work before you get in relationship, and sometimes it's too late, and that's okay, we can still backtrack. But in that sense, that's essentially how it happens. That's why you trigger each other in the ways that we do. And we have examples planned of like how that actually happens. But it's crazy because our definitions often don't have people thinking of the right stuff. They just think of like, well, I didn't get my ass beat, so I don't have trauma.
Or I wasn't with an alcoholic dad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to move to sharing kind of like what we've had come up?
Yeah, I mean, and just adding to what you're saying,
Yeah.
all of us, we're just adults that are
I
little
know.
kids, just real tall and big, and because most of us are our 0 to 8 year old self walking around, we're acting the same way. A lot of times, if we didn't get that love as a kid, we're looking for that in our relationship. Right. We're looking for it in all the wrong places, if that makes sense. But it's simply because we didn't get that love as a kid, and that could be a trauma.
Absolutely.
I mean, I like the fact that you said all trauma is not like a blatant trauma. It doesn't have to be a blatant trauma. It could have been, maybe you went to sleep hungry every night. That could be trauma. It's my God, every single night you're hungry, and so you have a certain type of relationship with food, and you take that into your actual marriage relationship. And you're like, there's people that mark names on food and they argue about food, but all that stuff came from being a kid. You know what I mean? We grew up in those types of environments, and so just because it's not a trauma that we would necessarily have to quote unquote feel like we need to go to a therapist or something to right away, there are a bunch of small traumas that we encounter that cause us to act the way we act.
It's true. And actually, some of them come with plus sides too. And that's the crazy part. And I think that's why it's been downplayed even in the medical community for as long as it has. Because someone could say, like, for example, I certify coaches in a sensory acuity, right? Like, how do you work with people not only to understand the words that are coming out of their mouth, how does that represent their wiring up in their head, but also why do their eyes move where they move when they talk? You know, why does their face change? Why does their lip quiver at certain things, right? And the reason I can really say honestly that one of the things that made me really adept at that is my growing up with an emotionally labile mother. She was all over the place, so all of us walked on eggshells, right? And so I have trauma from walking at like one, and you know, and we'll go into this, but like one eyebrow twitch from you and I'm like, what's wrong? Right. Did I do something to make me mad? Right? Like that's going to be my flavor of trauma. On the flip side, though, I unequivocally and without any argument will say that helped me in what I do. I've made lots and lots and lots of money from having that skill as developed as I had it. Mm-hmm. Right. So you might be like, yeah, that, you know, yes, my dad leaving me made me really resilient. That's awesome. And you can still have that. Like, I'm still really good at sensory acuity, but when it impacts me negatively in other areas of my life, that's where I, as an adult, want to reclaim that. I don't want to be stuck at where my mom made me feel like XYZ, right? Yeah. I'm an adult now. I've grown up. So I want to move myself past that point. Right. I can make more. I can impact the world more. I can help more people when I overcome that. So just because we can make an argument for why it was quote unquote good for you to go through it does not negate the fact that it was traumatic for you and still may or may not impact your life, but probably unless you've done something to change it, you're probably living out that old neural net, the old wiring that you have.
Yeah, and I was at your talk, I'm thinking like even it's not always physical trauma either. It could be words. Like as you were talking, I was just thinking like I've heard people say, you're going to be just like your father. And if he's not a good person, you're going to associate that with yourself. And as you become an adult, it's ironic how people say you're going to jail like your brother or your dad, and they go to jail, right? Because really they put that on them, but that's a trauma, if that makes sense. And so we're just trying to find all the different traumas out there to let us know that we all need to do the work. Because absolutely. I feel like, Alex, right now, we're in a moment in time where people are understanding that we need to self-improve. Yep. We need to work on ourselves. There's some work that we need to do. And so what we're wanting to do with this podcast is just bring this stuff to the forefront. Like, we're not perfect people. We're not even going to claim to be. We told y'all how we're starting a podcast. We just get on here and we jump on. We just want to be real with you. And we want you guys to be real with us and give us topics and things. If there's something that we're talking about that we left out, we want you guys to put it in the comments and add that. But we want to bring a real discussion, and we want to bring healing to the world as far as this masculine and feminine space, because there's so many good people out there, but unfortunately we've had these traumas and things happen to us, and we're not being able to be the person that we really need to be inside of our relationship because of those traumas.
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes for that that I heard, I didn't come up with this, I'm not actually sure where it comes from, but what happened to you is not your fault, but dealing with it on what comes next is your responsibility.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's the tenet, is that what's cool about living in masculine and feminine balance is their ability to heal each other. And we'll kind of circle back around to that in the end. But that's the whole thing, is that there's actually powerful functions that happen when the masculine and feminine work together. So it's not just, normally we're like, we can stir up stuff, but then the answer isn't forthcoming on what to do about it. We can just say, even before we get any farther, is that is the answer, right? And being able to find someone and to navigate life in a way where you're looking for that masculine and feminine balance that you want, that you're seeking, it heals. And we'll kind of share our stories on that, but we've seen firsthand just how much healing is possible without paying like formal experts even. Now, that's part of it, but I mean, I think that is the answer.
Yeah,
And so any work that we do is like the benefits are going to be right there for you.
for
It's
sure.
right there.
Which leads us to our next point. Like, what are some of the things in your opinion that can be done to help people like heal their traumas and things like that? Like,
Yeah,
what are some of the resources that
definitely.
people can
Let me share some
use?
examples that I've had in my own life where it just is to give everyone some ideas of what this looks like. For one, I really realized when I got divorced and I moved into my own place, um, I realized I never finished food in my, like, if there was, the last little bit of food in the fridge or in the pantry, I never would finish it. So I was always throwing away, and I'd be like, I feel weird about this. Like, I'm not really a wasteful person. So, like, I don't really know why I'm doing this. And it wasn't a problem when I lived with my ex-husband. Right. And then when we moved in together, then I started having the experience where you started offering me the last bit of something when we were together.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized was that I had really uncomfortable feelings when you would offer me that, right? Like I never would take it and I
Yeah.
would never finish it. I always would leave the last slice or the last piece or whatever and offer it to you. And together, Jay and I realized that I had the programming in my head from where I'm from, which is I was born in Russia, and it was the food is allotted, especially like communist Russia when there wasn't a lot. I mean, this is like bread lines and you're waiting in a 6-hour line for your 5-pound bag of flour, and stuff for the year. All the rations in my head, like what I saw growing up was that the bigger people, which were the men, would get more food. Right. And so I had that programming of I didn't even realize the whole time I was living by myself after divorce, none of that food in the fridge was mine.
Wow.
Like that I never saw it as mine. That's why I never finished it. It was just I moved from, my parents' house to college in with my boyfriend at the time, and then, we moved in and got married. And so yeah, it was like I had never even had the opportunity to clock that
That's
until it came up. It was just like, this food's not mine, it's for the men, and if there's leftovers, I'm gonna make new food and leave the made leftovers for like if you are busy. But gosh, I had never even consciously heard myself think those thoughts. Like it was just kind of a given to me, like, oh, he may run in and be hungry and just want to stick that in the microwave. But it wasn't like I was sitting around thinking all of that. So it wasn't until I felt the discomfort of you offering me and being like, why the hell do I feel discomfort? Right? Like
That's
it makes no
interesting.
sense. So that's the kind of thing that so hopefully you guys are listening and being like, huh, it really can be anything. How you brush your teeth, how you wash your hands. Do you wiping your ass? Do you
Mm-hmm.
stand up after the fifth wipe or the first wipe? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Or after the wet one? Like, everything you do is because of something.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you
Yeah,
have
and
any
and when you
example?
talk, I think about me growing up. We didn't have a lot of food either. We were in America, but we ate till we like are about to pop because it may not be
Yeah.
any food later.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And
And
you
so
do
it's like
that
you
all
better
the
get
time.
full, and
Yeah.
I'd still do that now. And again, that could be a challenge in our relationship if we weren't paying attention. Like if we
Mm-hmm.
weren't present and understanding like our backgrounds, where we came from, how we live. That little small thing about food, guys, could be a challenge in our relationship, if that makes
Absolutely.
sense.
Absolutely. I have a hefty sexual abuse history, as you know. Now that this has been something that I've been working on from therapists to coaches to everything since I was 14 years old. 14 years old, I realized like, oh wow, that was not supposed to have happened, right? And so I started to work on it. And one of the things and so that's big T trauma, I knew about that. I knew. Now, it wasn't until I did subconscious reprogramming and that type of coaching that we do that I remembered much more of the things that had happened to me. My brain had repressed it as it, should to protect me. But once I got the resources, I started to unpack it. I actually started remembering more of the events that had happened to me, and so that was interesting. But that's that kind of thing where in sex, it's like it's been an ongoing thing that I have to work on. And that's the reason why I always have a coach, right? Like for me, even now, my current coach right now is an intimacy coach because we're working on the old patterns that I have now. The things that it impacts is from things that I believed and began to absorb about women, like misogyny type stuff, like the feminine's chaotic or she's unpredictable or the feminine's not trustworthy. Like I had taken that stuff on because that had been the cause of the abuse, right? Like I had accepted it into myself, but also for touch. I remember when I got certified for my first coaching certification, we worked on collapsing the anchor of being choked, and and that's that kind of thing where just the physical touch to release that association. Now when we are intimate and stuff, you can touch my neck, no problem, but before then there was no way this area was going to be a cause for a freak out. Right? And so it really, the reason I always sort of intentionally work on it is because I know the effects that it had is so broad. Yeah. Right? Like everything from your tone of voice to how you talk to me to your body positioning when we're having sex, or any of that is things that my brain uses and recognizes as part of the trauma. So to unpack that, it's been so cool to see, like, I used to feel like, oh, I'm so ashamed that it happened to me and stuff like that. But then as I worked on it, I began to see, like, none of this is who I am. Like all these things that make us who we, like, they're just things that happen along the way, but they're not who we are. And that made it so much easier to unpack and not take on. Like, as in, I'm okay just being like, it's cool. I have an ongoing, work on this. I have a coach. I pay her, and everything is fine. So it allows me to sort of like exist, and we have a very healthy sex life. So I'm happy with the progress. And I know that there's going to be more, and it's going to be a lot of fun to uncover all that stuff. But it started in not a very fun way. Like it was just literally getting it to unpack trauma. Who knew a really amazing sex life was going to be on the other end of it? I didn't.
Absolutely.
I didn't.
Yeah, and I just think for me, I didn't have my dad growing up. He was never around. My mom, she raised us some, but my grandmother, it seems like she raised us for the most part, and that could be a trauma.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, growing up in a single parent home, wondering why your dad's not there. That could be a trauma. Or if or vice versa. Your dad was there and your mom wasn't there. Or if you were raised by your grandma, why are neither one of my parents there? And so the thing that I learned as I went through my coaching and getting certified was I suffer from what's called abandonment. Knowing that my dad wasn't around and my mom really wasn't. She was around, but I feel like my grandmother raised me. That's just what I remember, is us being with my grandma all the time. I'm sure my mom was around, but I just remember us being with my grandma all the time. And so you don't realize that when you grow up and you get into relationships, that abandonment is still there. And so what happens a lot of times is you become a nice guy or a nice girl, and you become a people pleaser because you don't want other people to leave you, right? And so I grew up, everybody likes me, you know what I mean, because I was a people pleaser. I was never going to do anything to make anybody mad because my trauma was people always left me, and I didn't know that's what it was, but that's a real thing. And so I know you're in sexual trauma. We're just trying to give you some different things to let you know that all these things bleed out into your relationship. And so some practical examples of that is like, you get into a relationship and you're afraid to speak up for yourself. Yeah. Right? Because you think you're going to be left. You're like, well, if I say something back, I mean, your partner's rude to you, but you're afraid because what if I get left again? Right? Yeah. And so sometimes we take things that we shouldn't be taking or doing things we shouldn't be doing simply because we've dealt with the trauma of being abandoned as a kid. And that's just one example that I thought of as you were talking. And so
absolutely. Yeah. And we had conversations about that when when we were early dating, where I'd be like, can you tell me what you want me to do? And you'd be like, no. like as in you weren't necessarily wanting to tell me what to do, in the same way, even though like and that's how I think, like, how does someone recognize it? Consciously, we were talking about like masculine leadership and all this stuff, but then sometimes I'd even ask for it and you'd be like, and then that led to some really great conversations about all that, right? We had one conversation around like cleaning, like where one of us recognized, like, you know, why is this a problem? And the other person, I don't even remember which way it had been, but it was basically like, this is how I clean the countertops or whatever it was. And the other person was like, oh, right, let me not insert myself into it. Like, if you're ever kind of like, why is this happening? Stop and consider if this is, it's like, are they playing out a relationship that isn't actually you? If they're talking to you like, you're like, why are they talking? They don't normally talk to me like this. Like he sounds more rude, or she sounds more upset than she normally does. She doesn't normally yell like that. Sometimes you can even get a sense they're like, your brain's not talking to me. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like you're talking to your ex-wife or something, or you're talking to your ex-husband or something, like, and the amount of times that happens and the person who's actually speaking doesn't realize it is most often.
You're traumatizing like, your new partner.
And yes, that can happen. I've seen a lot of people who have left their relationship, got into another one they thought was great, and were actually traumatized more by their situationship or whatever than their like 20-year marriage. And to that point, yes, I mean, you can actually take that trauma, you were the victim, traumatized, and then go and actually traumatize someone else with it. And of course, no one wants to do that. We don't have to feel ashamed if we end up doing that. But at the same time, let's just have the conversations, that the real ones, that say, how do we not do that? Right? How do we actually work on this? And I think the good news is that you don't have to be single just because you have things happen to you. I mean, if it happens to everyone, then join the party.
Yeah, and I feel like communication is key. Like, even with all these traumas, is being in a relationship, and we talked about it on one of the other episodes, is having that safe space for your partner where if they do have the trauma, that you can just listen to them versus trying to fix it. Like,
that was episode 2 for anyone.
Was it? Okay. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that communication is how you come together.
Yeah.
And you understand the trauma. Like she talked about her sexual trauma. Well, by us talking about it, I knew certain things I could do. I know certain things I can do. And that just keeps us on good footing, if that makes sense. Versus if we're not communicating and I'm trying to do certain stuff and it's lumped in with her trauma, we're going to have a problem. And so communication is paramount in all of these situations. Is communicating what feels good to you, what does not feel good to you, what you like, what you don't like. I think we have to have those conversations in order to move the ball down the road.
I think so too. And I think it's important for men on this topic to put down their logical badge of honor. Like men are kind of talked about as being logical. But the thing is, if you're reacting from trauma to your current partner based on the past, it's not logical. So if you force yourself into being like, I have to be logical all the time, this doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to work on it, who the fuck cares? Right? Like, who cares if it's logical or not? Who cares? The whole point of this discussion is to say it won't be logical. You are playing out old programming, and making it logical, it happens by working on it so that you can respond like, I'm upset about this cleaning. I'm not upset about how my mom treated me and this cleaning, which leads me to scream at you, right? That's that kind of thing. So it's not, please don't expect it to be logical. If it's logical, it probably is not trauma, because your emotional compass is supposed to point to you. That hurt my feelings. I set a boundary. That's all just normal. That's where the logic comes in. But this kind of stuff, it ain't logical. It's just not. So making sure that you're like, I heard this when you said this, and that makes no sense, and that's okay. It should be a normal conversation. Like, that's kind of how we do it, right?
Yeah, sure.
And what was your actual experience of, like, as I started kind of including you and the fact that I had trauma? I mean, I started out with a very kind of general statement, just letting you know that it had happened and that there were some things. And then later on, I told you a little bit more detail. Like, how did that go for you from a masculine side?
For me, I was open to it,
Okay.
partly because I had done a lot of work on myself. Just to share with you guys, I used to be very defensive, and I took everything personal. But again, it comes from the way I was brought up
Mm-hmm.
as a child,
Yeah.
and so I did a lot of work on myself, and I knew that. And so whenever she was telling me about her trauma, I didn't try to fix it. I didn't try to. I just tried to be there for you, because you
Mm-hmm.
were getting emotional telling me about it, and so I just did my best to be there for you, and just listen and just hear you out and be that safe space for you to be able to get it all out and just tell me how you really feel, how it went, and what's good right now, what doesn't work right now. And fellas, we have to be willing to sit there and listen to that, right? Because your woman will tell you what she needs if you'll just listen, if that makes sense. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I felt like it was an intimate experience because I mean you were telling me something that you didn't have to tell me, and it was
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, we got kind of cool pretty quick. And
Mm-hmm.
so
We did.
I felt like it just brought us closer together, because for you to be able to share something like that was so deep, so intimate, and just something that wasn't good for you, something traumatic that happened to you. So for you to share that with me early on, I felt, I guess I want to say I felt special, like for
Yeah.
you to
Okay.
share that with me, to be able to trust me to hold that for you, and I just think it was one of the things that helped us get closer faster. Is just being honest about the trauma, which goes back to the communicating that we're talking about. We were actually talking, and as you keep talking, then you can get to the sexy time, fellas. But if you don't talk, you can't get to the sexy time. That's just
And
a
it's gonna be
side note for
good
y'all.
sexy time. Yeah, yeah. Now, part of my willingness to share came from the fact that I had done a lot of work on it. So I was no long. I was already coaching and teaching and talking about it on my other podcast publicly. So it's not that that was the first time I had ever shared the trauma, but I can say it would happen as fast as it did because I have always, since we met, I feel into what's appropriate. Like I'm using my intuition as a feminine to sort of feel into: is it safe? Is it a good idea? So, I didn't have anything that I was going by, like, okay, we hit 3 months, time to share this. We hit 6 months, time to share that. I kind of had the idea of, like, I'll do a 30-second summary up front, and then, a little more detail later. And then if we want to sit at some point and, like, go through all the details and, hear about the guy and whatever, like, I could do that, but I was going to let that unfold as it happened. And I feel like that's the only thing I can really recommend, because I think there's no way to know if someone's trustworthy or how much. You were showing me signs that your masculinity was safe for me to share that kind of stuff. And so it was pretty early, but that's probably because of who you are, and I liked it and all that. And I think in some ways that's where I can really say, even though I had worked on it for a long time beforehand, I've made the most amount of progress in this relationship. Like, it's crazy. As I heal my mind and the trauma that I, like, the interpretations that I made of, there must be something wrong with me of what happened, or it's because I'm bad, or because I'm messed up, or whatever. All of those things actually change the wiring, like, in my physical body, how I actually feel the sensations. And that was something that you and I didn't even really, like, know about at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. Like, we didn't know that that would be a benefit. But when you change your brain, you change your entire nervous system. Now, I knew that conceptually from being a doctor. I had never had an example like that, though, that, like, even in my medical career someone had really worked on that. But I can say, like, it actually changes how you are. And the same, like, how you've always said, as you accept more of your masculinity, you grew out a beard, like, as in, you feel yourself, your actual physical body differently now, it
Absolutely.
seems like.
Yeah, and as I look back on it, babe, I think that was one of the things that set the tone for our relationship. I mean, as we
Which
look
one?
back on it, like you telling me about your sexual
Yeah.
trauma, because there's something in a relationship. Is like when someone tells you a secret or they let a wall down, it naturally lets you let a wall down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you some stuff about my background, and she would tell me more stuff about her background, and it just went back and forth, and we just got closer and closer and closer and closer. And that's what a relationship about is communicating. You should be able to let your partner know your deepest, darkest secrets. Because if you can't tell them, who can you tell? I mean,
Right.
there should be one person in this world that you can tell everything
Right.
to. Like, not everything, but you know what I'm saying. Like,
Everything if you want to. Like,
exactly.
as in, if you don't want to, cool, that's your
Yeah,
thing. But,
but for the most part, you
right.
should be able to share freely with your partner. And I feel like by you sharing that early on, that's one of the things. And I'm not embarrassed about that. Set the tone for the relationship because a lot of times we're not gonna be the first one to, take our pants down, so to speak. You know what I mean? I ain't petting. You take yours down, I'm take mine down. And
Yeah,
so
right.
once you pulled your pants down, uh, I decided to pull mine
Prefer
down.
Bailey.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, there was really only I can only have made that determination by feel.
Yeah.
It felt like the right thing. There was no, I think once people get burned, they're like, how will I know that this person's safe? You don't. You have to be okay with you enough to trust you and trust yourself to handle. Had he not been who he is, who I thought he was, and had that, I would have handled unpacking that, getting myself out, and okay, so that guy would have known about my trauma. Okay, that doesn't really do anything to me, right? So it's sort of like if you have questions, it might be more on in your ballpark of like, are you okay with your trauma and who you are and what you bring to the table? And as long as that's cool, then you're good. But otherwise, it doesn't need to be about the other person. Sometimes sharing traumatic things gives you a glimmer, though, sometimes of who somebody is. Like, they might be great for a good time, they might be a great conversationalist, but they are shit at being compassionate when it comes to real life, like real things. And so, that's why I have my little rubric of like, you share a little bit up front and you're essentially looking for, can this person hold it?
I like that.
I do that. So I think what we're saying is you can actually heal your trauma within a masculine feminine relationship for free. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Heal each other.
People always say like, oh, you have to be in relationship or you have to heal yourself and then be in relationship. I personally, and I think you too, I don't think we agree with that because it's sort of like you're gonna get yourself good and then here they're gonna come the other person and piss you off again and trigger you in a way that you hadn't thought of at home by yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you might as well just date if you're gonna do that. Now, there are some caveats to that. If you know you're going to mess up a person, don't. But, like, the flip side is you ain't going to be perfect. So you
Yeah.
might as well do that. Otherwise, there's coaching.
For sure.
So,
That's what I was going to say, just to kind of wrap up the episode. We just talked about one, but what are some other things, in your opinion, that people can do, like to help them resolve the traumas? Like, what are some resources and stuff that you'd recommend?
I think there's a couple different large categories that can happen is that somatic exercises, that's SOMATIC, somatic. That is to say, trauma and information that happens to us can be stored and is stored in our organ systems, like in our physical body. So they are very simple exercises. They often involve movement of the hips or opening the front of the body, hand positions. There's a couple different types of flavors. Like in our level 2 certification, we learn somatic processing, somatic hand positions, all that. But you can Google any of that. That stuff's really widely available. So that's more like physical body. The other thing that can really help to calm down the nervous system, to help you think more clearly, kind of to move yourself through trauma or move yourself through an experience of having to talk about it or come up with a plan about it or whatever, is parasympathetic nervous exercises. So things like humming, singing, gargling water all activate the vagus nerve. You can calm yourself down. Getting into your peripheral vision. This is why people like to go for drives to clear their mind. Getting into activating your peripheral vision activates that calming down mechanism in the brain. Yep.
Nice.
So there's a lot of kind of thumping on the chest in the middle of the breastbone. That also stimulates the vagus nerve. There's a whole slew of these exercises. They are easily found, but that kind of stuff can really help practically. And then subconscious reprogramming, which is what we both do.
Absolutely. So
yeah, subconscious reprogramming is essentially taking old decisions you made, uninstalling that program in terms of in your brain, the neural net that holds the memory of that, essentially taking that apart and reinstalling the new thing that you want instead, right? If like I had men are dangerous was one I had. Funnily enough, I had the feminine's dangerous too. Go figure.
Right.
That program is a bitch. But I had men are dangerous. I had to uninstall that and come up with, a new thing of I choose the men that I'm around. And that was the subconscious programming that I did. So we'll talk all about subconscious programming and coaching. That's its whole own thing in future podcast episodes. But I think so. That's what we got for y'all. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I just think one of the things that all of us need to do is just realize that we all have to change. Yep. Like, even though we're sitting here doing this podcast, we're constantly working on ourselves. We're constantly trying to get better for ourselves, but we're also trying to get better for one another. And I think it's a beautiful.
Love you.
So, yeah. All right, guys, that's a wrap on our episode 3. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening to the Rocks and Oceans podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend that could use this information. Let's build a happier and more powerful world together.